Hi everyone, this is Regis again from the Practice Research Agency, where every day we are keenly aware of what is going on in the world of advertising, of course, especially what is being released out there in consumer land. And I recently saw an ad, and I'll explain the context of this in a bit, but I recently saw an ad that was, I would call it visually beautiful. It was cleverly written, and it was completely unclear in what it wanted me to do. So there was not a creative problem, but rather a more kind of holistic advertising problem. And this ad was the latest ad from Mirvac. And what I'd like to do in this video is talk about what Mirvac is actually doing with this ad and by using this advertising. Now, the ad, and I've posted a link to the ad below, but I will also play it here because it's going to be difficult to talk about it without playing it. And if anyone wants to listen to this, then just taking a little bit of time just to watch the ad is going to make all the difference, unless, of course, you've seen the ad. So I recently came across this advertisement that I'm about to play from Mirvac.
In the imagination, communities have more heart. Play is magical. Shopping is full of wonder. And the everyday is transformed into something truly extraordinary. Mirvac, building the imagination.
I didn't see the ad. I actually saw an article about the ad in Mumbrella. The article was about Mirvac creating this ad and how it was created, and I guess maybe why they created it, although we'll come to that later on. So just a quick disclosure, I actually have no relationship at all with Mirvac. I don't even know who made the ad. I don't have a relationship with any particular advertising agency. I've never done any research for Mirvac or anything. I don't know anyone at Mirvac, I don't think. So I'm approaching this ad more as a researcher, but as much as possible through a consumer lens. Even though I'm a researcher, this is obviously not a study. I have not collected consumer information on this, but it is an analysis. It's an analysis. It's a subjective analysis in this regard, but it is grounded in theory, and it is grounded in the way that we usually assess advertising. And when I say we, I think the entire research industry. And so, but to do that properly, we do what the research industry does, which is break the ad down into various components, what we might say standard research measures, the standard research measures that we use to assess advertising, whether it be qualitative, whether it be quantitative. We seem to gravitate to these. And I've just got to flash them up here. These are anyone who's been involved in any of this, in marketing or whatever. Obviously, nothing here is new. In order to reduce the subjectivity of the analysis, we're going to look at it through these particular lenses: appeal, memorability and cut through, distinctiveness, relevance, the effect on brand perception, and of course, the potential behavioural effect on that. So we can't really assess an ad holistically. We have to deconstruct it in this way. Let's look at appeal. Now, appeal is inherently subjective, and what appeals to one person doesn't necessarily appeal to another person, but both views are equally valid because there is no right or wrong in this sort of stuff. And especially when it comes to appeal of advertising, there is absolutely no right or wrong. But that said, in our experience, appeal in advertising is usually driven by some sort of emotion that has to do with very often humor or nostalgia or some kind of warmth or maybe some sort of aspiration. Obviously, aspiration is a big part of advertising and what it promises, but something that creates feeling, something that creates feeling. Now, this ad, as you've seen, has fantasy It is visually attractive. Well, it is cartoonish, purposely cartoonish at times. Not cartoonish, it is a cartoon at times. But fantasy isn't necessarily emotional. It can be passed off as emotional, but it's not really necessarily targeting our emotions. Now, I'm probably being a bit harsh about that. It's probably doing some sort of job there as well. But there doesn't seem to be. Okay, look, the fact that there's no central character in there because it is difficult without a person or a cast, if you like, who are speaking, who are engaging the audience. It is difficult to have a relationship with the advertising without the people in it. If so, that we don't have that kind of what we call emotional or persona anchor. There's not much there for the viewer to relate to in terms of this person. I like this person. This person's funny. I dislike this person, whatever the case may be. It's not really about people. It's about buildings. And I can't say that buildings don't inspire emotion. They absolutely do. But we'll come to that. We'll come to what kind of buildings inspire emotion or create emotion, I'm sorry, and what buildings do not. Is it appealing? Yeah, yes, it's appealing. It's nice to look at. I should ask the other question. We should ask the question, is it unappealing? And the answer to that, I think, would be no, it's not unappealing. It actually has quite a lot of visual appeal. It is nice to look at. Does it strike an emotional chord? Look, probably not. Okay, probably not. More of a fantasy type of chord. Maybe is that aspiration? I mean, maybe buildings do symbolize aspiration. Our homes, our houses, our commercial buildings, our state buildings. They do create aspiration, if you like. They're reaching for something. We're aspiring to something through these structures. But is it emotional in the context of creating an emotional link with the advertising? Possibly not. I would say possibly not. And the tagline itself, it's a very clever tagline, building the imagination, reinforces that sort of fantasy feeling. Mirvac is about imagination, right? Mirvac is about imagination, which is actually not necessarily a bad starting position, is it? A building company, a developer is all about imagination, I guess. That's probably not a bad position, if you want to call it a position, to be in at this point in terms of that brand personality, if you like. Okay. No, so it's not unappealing. It's probably rather appealing in the sense it has a visual look. And as a result of having that visual look, I guess it is drawing out some sort of emotion. We don't know what emotion that is. Again, you need research to figure that out, but we can analyze it in the sense that is it creating some sort of emotional bond? And yeah, look, our best answer here is possibly not, actually, possibly not. And as hypothesis is that is distinct from fantasy. Fantasy does not necessarily equal emotion, although the two can actually be confused as well. So let's look at cut through and memorability. And it's really hard to judge cut through without research, to be honest. Even with research, it's hard to judge it. But subjectively, the visual execution helps. You would say that, right? You would say that, okay, look, if this is visually inspiring in some way, and reading the article, they purposely did that. They purposely did that quite sophisticated, technologically sophisticated, but very nice visual execution on purpose, quite possibly in order to create this cut through and memorability in that regard. And the tagline, building the imagination, is clever. I wouldn't necessarily call it an earworm, but it is poignant in the current political housing climate. So it's almost politically phrased like building the nation, like building the nation, building the imagination. So it's quite clever. It's quite clever in that it's taking a what could be a very cold developer brand like Mirvac or whatever, and injecting into it this level of imagination, which is I wouldn't call it childish, but from childhood, something we associate with being a child, imagination, even though obviously adults have imagination, but it's just something we associate with being a child in a sense. It's saying something clever and it looks quite nice, so it might have some cut through and memorability, but mainly because it looks good and sounds fairly clever. But look, the question is that how long does this memory last? And what does that memory attach itself to in any way? And this has now got, we're coming into this now. It's because it's got to do with, well, now that I've seen this ad, what do I do next? And we're coming to that. But before we do that, with cut through memorability, I think something related to cut through memorability is distinctiveness. And distinctiveness is really tricky because it's like distinctive compared to what? Distinctive compared to all advertising? Because in a way, all advertising competes for our attention regardless of the category. So you could have a Mirvac ad, and then you might have an insurance ad, and then you might have a chocolate ad, and then you might have a whatever ad, right? Gambling ad. And I guess they're all competing with each other for our attention. They're not all competing in the same category, but they're all competing for our attention. So distinctiveness, I guess, in terms of distinctive as an ad full stop, is something that advertising needs as well, which is a humongous amount of pressure on the creatives. I don't know. I know a lot of people don't defend advertising agencies, but I will defend them in the sense that their job is, I think, far more difficult than most people realize, actually. Look, all aspects of it, but especially the creative aspect of it is an enormously difficult job, which is why only very few people can really do it. Distinctiveness is relative. Okay, but okay, relative to what? So Mirvac is a property developer. So is this ad distinctive to other ads from property developers or the housing sector of sorts? That's really hard, isn't it? What other ads do we know from property developers? We can't compare it to other property developers. It has to be compared to all ads. And so distinctiveness in compared to all advertising, I guess that swims around in our brain, our memory. I got to say, it feels a bit familiar. It looks nice and everything, don't get me wrong, but it feels familiar. It's like this tone we've heard before, this kind of music we've heard before, the imaginative visuals and the childhood fantasy and the soft optimism, if you like, and the that polished look and whatever. We've seen that, we've heard the tone before. We haven't seen this ad before, but we've seen this style before. Even though it's technologically up to date sort of ad, it the style is somewhat derivative. And again, this is not a criticism because it's very difficult to be entirely original nowadays, probably for a long time now as well. So it's a very inoffensive ad, isn't it? It's inoffensive. And does that impact on its memorability is something that we might not remember. So it looks nice, makes us feel sort of nice, but might be something that we don't remember necessarily. It might be forgettable because it does feel somewhat familiar and maybe overly optimistic. And we'll come to that as well in a sec. But there is another element of distinctiveness in this advertising that we have not considered, and that is the fact that Mirvac is making an ad at all, like a property developer is making an ad like this at all, and putting this much effort into it, in fact. That in itself might be distinctive. The fact that it's a Mirvac, a developer ad, that might be distinctive. That might make you notice because you don't often see this sort of thing. But that is interesting. And then interestingly, and this I guess has to do now with a kind of what we call this has to do with the interaction of mental and physical availability. And this is where this has actually really worked for me as a consumer. After I saw the ad, I actually went down to do some shopping at the local shopping centre and the supermarket, and I noticed for the very first time that it was a Mirvac shopping centre. And the reason I noticed is because the build your imagination scape was on the front, on their glass sliding doors at the front of the shopping centre. And now, was it there before I saw this ad? And I only saw this ad just last week. I don't know. If it was, I didn't notice it. I did not notice it if it was, but I saw the ad and then I noticed it. And that is actually that's gold, really. That's the mental and physical availability working together. You've seen the ad and now you've noticed something that you haven't noticed before because of that ad. So I'm more aware of the brand, Mirvac. I like the shopping center. It's quite nice. It's it's a smaller one, which I think is what Mirvac do anyway, but it's a very nice shopping center, right? Well, whilst I wouldn't necessarily call it imaginative, I don't necessarily think I need an imaginative shopping center. I just need a functional one, to be honest. But it does that quite well. And so I've noticed that is Mirvac now. So Ehrenberg Bass or the folk at Ehrenberg Bass would be very happy with this situation because it is mental availability. And look, and we're skeptical about the mental availability that it creates, but again, it is subjective at this point, but it works with the physical availability. So yeah, so that actually fits together very well. That aspect, that's for me. Now, what if my local shopping centre was not a Mirvac local shopping centre, and in all probability it wouldn't be because they're not everywhere? Then where would I get my physical, mental availability connection happening? So I've seen the ad, but then I don't see Mirvac anywhere in the world. Now I do. There are apartment buildings everywhere and whatnot, but I don't know if they're Mirvac or not because they're not branded they're not branded that way. Really? Are they? I don't know. If you get in the lift, I think you see it there or something. I don't know. But this is the thing. It doesn't necessarily appear in my everyday world. And this now leads us to what I think is the core issue with this ad and the one that warrants probably the most debate, which is relevance. What is this advertising for? Now, I've said a whole bunch of things about this ad, and I think mostly positive. Mostly positive is my analysis. But here is where we say where the rubber hits the road. Is it getting me on the road to do something, to go somewhere, to buy something, to do something? Who is this advertising for? And as a consumer now, what am I supposed to do with this advertising? Like I said, I've noticed the Mirvac brand, but now what do I do with it? So do I choose Mirvac instead of Westfield? No, that's crazy. It's not really a competition in that way, is it? My local shopping centre is a Mirvac, and the Westfield shopping centre is a bigger one down the road, and that's a Westfield. It's not like I see the ad for Mirvac, so I'm going to choose Mirvac over Westfield. It doesn't work that way. I don't know. If I'm an apartment investor or even a buyer, first home buyer, right? Whatever. Do I narrow my apartment search to Mirvac only buildings? Is that even actually possible? And why would I do that? Is there something about a Mirvac building that I should be paying attention to, that I should be looking more seriously at than other, I don't know, than say a Meriton building? So I'm not picking on Meriton or anything. These are the competitors, right? So there's no obvious behavioural pathway for me as a result of this advertising. And according to the Umbrella article, look, not I wouldn't say it's according to the Umbrella article. My reading of it gave me the impression that this is what we call it is corporate advertising. Mirvac probably would not disagree, I would imagine. They're not stupidly going out and making an ad, right? Thinking that what it's going to have some sort of consumer effect, right? They're not stupid. They would have understood that this is corporate advertising. So Mirvac advertising itself, its longevity, its scale, and positioning itself as this in putting this in it's this imagination position for a developer, right? For a developer, which is an interesting position for a developer, isn't it? The imagination position. Okay, so now I know my Mirvac is like putting the two and two together. Nice shopping center. It's Mirvac. Mirvac are a good company. They put imagination and thought into their creations, etc., etc. So what? If you've got a shopping center, I'll use it. If you don't, nearby, I won't. So what? This is the problem, isn't it? So this is not an inherently bad thing that it doesn't do anything for me as a consumer because it can't really. It's the category, isn't it? But it's not really going to change my behavior in any meaningful way. It might change my perception a little bit about the brand, but again, how is that ever going to be realized? How is that ever going to be realized? From that perspective, look, so this raises a question. So it's corporate advertising. It's about themselves in a way, not the people, of course, but about the corporation. Okay, so what? So does this mean that companies like Mirvac should never advertise? Or if they do advertise, it's got to be in some sort of more meaningful way from a consumer angle to justify the expense of the advertising and all that sort of thing, and also putting themselves out there. If you put an ad out there nowadays and it gets lampooned or I don't know, fails, I don't know whatever that means in advertising, I guess it can do you some harm reputationally from a corporate perspective. This is certainly not that. I'm absolutely no way is this doing them any harm. Probably doing them some good, to be honest. But again, it raises a question, doesn't it? What is the purpose of this advertising? So I guess if you're in this corporate environment and you're doing this advertising, it's going into it eyes wide open, right? We're spending this money in order to do this thing, and I guess it's going to promote us a little bit in some way. We're not expecting any huge upswing in anything as a result of it, but it does, in a sense, document our corporate position in some way in a category where these corporate positions are not documented. And if we're doing this thing called imagination, which you can apply. You can apply very much to architecture, right? Which is what we're talking about, building architecture. Imagination plays a huge role in architecture, right? So from that perspective, they're on code, aren't they? They're on code with this imagination thing. So look, I may have been a bit critical, but oh, it's not necessarily emotional, and it's not necessarily emotional. But that might also be a so what? Okay, if this is not meant to move me as a consumer because there's nothing I can do with this anyway, then don't worry about it. Don't worry about trying to get me emotionally, get me with this imagination positioning. Again, I can't do anything with it, right? I can't do anything with it, but I guess it affects my perception of Mirvac and their competitors, or in relation to their competitors anyway. But look, does it tell me much more about Mirvac? No, no. What else do I want to know about Mirvac as a consumer? I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm not sure what I want to know about them. So it's really up to them to decide what I need to know, what to find out for research or whatever the case may be. Yeah. Now, I don't want to end it there with what is the effect on the behavioral change. I want to add one element to this, which is what I call the cynical mode, right? Looking at the ad cynically and also looking at the irony in the ad. So let's switch into this cynical mode for a second. I'm quite good at doing this to the annoyance of many people around me. So when you think of imagination, fantasy, and creativity, do you think of modern high-rise apartments or modern shopping centers? Because I do not. So this is the cynic in me, that the cynics in me saying, oh, okay, Mirvac are telling me they're about creativity and imagination and all that sort of stuff. And I'm looking around at Mirvac building. There's nothing wrong with them, don't get me wrong, but I wouldn't call them imaginative. I wouldn't call them artistic. I wouldn't call them that. I'd be surprised if anyone would, to be honest with you. Most people complain about the aesthetics of high rise, which means that they do not find it imaginatively pleasing or creative. They're quite the opposite, right? They People find these buildings to be standardized, specified, costed, rationalized spaces. They're supposed to be efficient and functional and necessary, right? They're not meant to be they're not designed to be beautiful. They're not The budget for them to be beautiful probably isn't there. If you think of imagination and fantasy in buildings, it's the old buildings, it's the classical buildings, it's the cathedrals, the ornate architecture, the crazy ornateness, the completely unnecessary, functionally unnecessary ornateness and art and artistic beauty that was put into these old buildings to a level that we simply cannot replicate today. That we simply can't do it physically, and we certainly can't pay for it. So therefore, it can't happen if you can't pay for it. We just can't do it anymore. So modern building, modern development does not allow for all of that. It does not allow for a huge amount of imagination and creativity and ornateness and beauty and appreciation. There are exceptions, but they are the exceptional buildings. This is not a criticism of Mirvac. Like I said, Mirvac probably produce relatively high quality buildings as cost effectively as possible in today's environment. They are an entirely necessary part of this country, building homes for people and an increasing population, probably trying to make homes a bit more affordable and accessible. It's not totally up to them, though, however, they don't control the housing market. But the cynic in me says, yeah, come on, telling me that Mirvac is about imagination when I look around me and I don't really see that. That's probably a little bit aspirational at best. But hey, who said that aspiration was wrong in advertising? And who said it was wrong for Mirvac to look at themselves and say, hey, maybe we do want to make more aspirational creations. Maybe we do want to inject more imagination into our developments. Maybe this position in our company will infuse the company and the corporation itself to invest in and promote more beautiful buildings. It might have that effect. And if it does have that effect, that is an entirely positive effect on everyone, on consumers and residents and business owners and people who shop, consumers, everyone. And that's fine. So I'll leave that for today. We've analyzed this one to death, but I thought it was a very interesting ad because on the surface of it, it can look like, oh, yeah, it looks a bit whatever. Seen it a bit before. It's not memorable. But when you look at it, when you analyze it, and when you look at its purpose and what it does and doesn't do as well, and if you go into this situation as a marketer, eyes wide open in terms of what you can and cannot achieve with this sort of thing, I think it could be a very effective piece of advertising. So well done. And look, thank you again for listening this far, and we will speak again soon. Goodbye.